how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Truth Defender podcast. We are coming to you from the greatest country in the world, deep in the heart of the Lone Star State, Dallas, Texas. I'm your host, Paul Aguilar. I really appreciate you guys stopping in. If you guys are catching us on YouTube and you aren't already a subscriber, please consider hitting that subscribe button as well as that uh, bell icon. Um, Give me a sec. And also, if you guys can hit that like button as well, that'll really help us out. If you guys are trying to catch us on the go, you guys can check us out on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, as well as iHeartRadio at Truth Defender Podcast. We'll have all of the social media linked down below as well. If you guys have any questions or comments for myself or our guest or topic recommendations, you can send that over to thetruthDefender1776 at gmail.com. Our next guest is Mr. Ken Gerhard. Mr. Gerhard is a cryptozoologist and field investigator. He is a field investigator for the Center of Fortean Zoology, as well as a fellow of the Pangea Institute and consultant for several anomalous research organizations. He has traveled the world searching for evidence of mysterious animals and legendary beasts, including Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, the Chupacabra, enigmatic winged creatures, and even werewolves. In addition to co-hosting the History Channel's TV series Missing in Alaska, Ken has appeared in the series Monster Quest and is featured in the History Channel special, The Real Wolfman, as well as Ancient Aliens, Legend Hunters, Unexplained Files, Paranatural, Weird or What with William Shatner, and many, many other series as well. Mr. Ken Gerhard, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well, Paul. Thank you so much for having me on your show. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you today.
Appreciate you taking the time out. So I want to go ahead and jump straight in here. I guess so for myself, kind of the first run-ins with any kind of crypto animals or anything related. So I'm originally from West Texas, so I'm from El Paso. So the only kind of like thing you have out there that we heard of during that time was the Chupacabra. Didn't really hear too much about like Bigfoot, although I know there are stories of them out there. Around that time, it was just kind of Chupacabra and just a lot of the stuff that comes up from within Mexico. Now, I guess we can kind of maybe go back to your beginnings and how you got interested in it all. What were some of like the main creatures that you would hear about growing up?
Wow. Well, yeah. So first of all, I like to tell people that growing up, I was already really interested in monster movies and stuff. Like I love old Godzilla movies and Creature from the Black Lagoon and all those old horror movies. And I also loved animals. My father was a forestry professor. We spent a lot of time in the outdoors, and I used to collect all kinds of critters and things. So when I first heard about cryptozoology when I was a kid, this was back in the 70s, I was immediately like enthralled and just thought it was the coolest thing ever. But the first thing I ever heard about was Bigfoot. And I remember vividly one Saturday morning watching cartoons, and there was a little news break where they talked about Bigfoot sightings, and they showed a clip of that famous film known as the Patterson-Gimlin film, where you can see the Bigfoot kind of striding off into the woods, and they were showing plaster casts of these giant human-like footprints. So that was the first cryptid I ever heard of, and was very fascinated with that. The possibility that there was some mysterious hair-covered giant human-like creature running around in North America was pretty amazing. And then my mother was a big influence on me, and she used to tell me stories about the Yeti and the Mothman. And of course, nobody really heard of the Chupacabra until the 1990s. So that was kind of I've investigated a lot of those alleged accounts. So yeah, it's been a lifelong passion of mine. I attempted my first field research when I was 15 years old. My family took a vacation at Loch Ness in Scotland, which is home of the famous Loch Ness Monster, also known as Nessie. And so when I was 15 years old, I was, kind of camping out by the lake with a movie camera and interviewing local people and trying to collect evidence. And so, yeah, it's just been a lifelong passion of mine. I didn't really plan on making it a career, but I've been very blessed, Paul, to have had opportunities to travel and investigate a lot of these subjects. And written some books, and as you mentioned, I've also been on a number of television shows. So it's been quite a ride, but I really love what I do.
Yeah, it's great. So I mean, like you mentioned, you've been all over the world. I mean, is there, I guess, maybe one kind of creature that sticks out from around the world that really caught your interest the most? Like, I mean, is there like one like special one that you really, wanted to go out looking for?
Oh man, people ask me that all the time, and it's really hard for me to choose because I have a very diverse interests. I mean, I'm very active in the Bigfoot field. I've investigated that all over North America. Um, Thunderbirds, these giant winged creatures, and actually we have a lot of accounts in Texas, ranging from Dallas, but mainly down in the Rio Grande Valley and places around Brownsville and Harlingen and some of those spots, Laredo. Um, Chupacabra. I have to say my favorite. I say hard to say favorite, but one interesting one that I've investigated was down in Belize, which is of course nestled just below Mexico, there in the Caribbean, Central American country, and there have been accounts there of a Bigfoot type creature known as the Sisamito, and also a small one called the Duende. So there's two different types of one's giant, one's small, but they're both described as being like hairy and man-like. And a lot of people are not aware of the fact that there are Bigfoot accounts not only from Central America but also in Mexico.
Right.
Like in this, I have contacts in Mexico in the Sierra Madres that give me accounts of something known as the ganocos or ganos, which is like a Bigfoot type creature. And then Bigfoot sightings range all the way down. So, anyways, I love the habitat in Belize. I was in the interior of the country. It was very thick jungle, lots of Maya ruins, and we were searching in the mountains there for this creature. People, the locals there, the Maya people, describe it as a man-like gorilla standing about 6 or 7 feet tall, and it lives up in the mountains, and it screams very loud, and that sounds just like a description of Bigfoot or Sasquatch here in the U.S. So,
Right.
I didn't find any conclusive evidence. Obviously, I interviewed a lot of people down there, and heard some stories of giant footprints and other things. But that was kind of a fun investigation down there. But again, mainly because of the habitat. It's very remote, kind of montane jungle type of habitat. So it's you know pretty much unexplored. So
Sure. I've always been kind of curious as to how, I guess, h- how does one, I guess, get like an expedition together to go out looking for things? I mean, obviously, there's a lot of like-minded people that are actually, also looking for these things as well. But I mean, how does one go about, I don't know, I guess, finding people to say, "Hey, I need you to come with," or "Let's go out and look for this and that." I mean, obviously, all you need is the will to go. But I mean, do y'all guys kind of stay in touch and just say like, "Hey, this is what I found lately. Do you have anything new?" And you guys just kind of pack up and take off. Is that how that works?
yeah, yeah, pretty much. I mean, the cryptozoology community is pretty tight knit. We're spread out around the world, but everybody that's into this pretty much knows each other. There's an organization that I belong to in England called the Center for Fortean Zoology, and they've actually for years they've been mounting expeditions all over the world to search for everything from the Tasmanian tiger, which is a cryptid down in the island of Tasmania, south of Australia, the orang pendek, which is like a Bigfoot creature, a little foot, really, because it's smaller from the Sumatran jungle and so forth. So that's one example of an organization that does it. But more often, I'm often invited by my colleagues, as you kind of inferred. Maybe somebody has said, "Hey, I've got this area. We need to go check it out," and so we'll just kind of put it together. We're all self-funded, so we pretty much just have to pay for this out of our pockets, which is fine. It's about discovery. But I'll give you one recent example. At the beginning of July, I went with three colleagues out to Northern California to search for evidence of giant salamanders. And salamanders, of course, are large amphibians. They look like lizards, but they're amphibians. They're related to frogs and toads and newts and stuff. But there have been reports for years from this particular area called the Trinity National Forest of monstrous salamanders from like 5 to 8 feet long, truly gigantic.
Right.
And this particular expedition actually started out on a Facebook post because someone mentioned these giant salamander accounts from Northern California. And a couple of my friends were commenting underneath and said, "Oh, I'd love to go do that. Me too." And so I messaged them both and I said, "Well, let's go." So
Right.
it took us months, but we kind of, got together logistically, and four of us went out there and drove out from Texas and Oklahoma. And we spent about a week searching, didn't find any evidence of these monster salamanders. But that's just one example of, I guess, with social media now, if you can connect with the right people, you can put your own expedition together.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you've obviously been around the world looking for like all kinds of monsters as well. I mean, what's kind of like the most remote areas, that you've actually had to travel to look for, these kind of things?
Wow. Well, Central America, like I said, is pretty remote. I've camped along the Amazon River in South America. That's about as remote as it gets.
Right.
There are sightings down there of a creature called the Mapinguari, which is possibly a Bigfoot or possibly a gigantic ground sloth about 6 feet tall.
Okay.
There were huge ground sloths that were around during the Ice Age, the Pleistocene, about 10,000 years ago down there, and some people claim to still see them. Um, I've hiked the desert of Australia. That's a pretty vast. I mean, once you get into the interior of Australia, it's just as vast and unexplored as you can imagine, and it's a very dry, probably not that dissimilar from El Paso in that area. You can
Well,
imagine that going on for like a couple
forever.
thousand miles.
Forever.
Yeah. Um, I have some colleagues that have gone to the Congo in Africa, which is a pretty treacherous expedition, searching for reports of living dinosaurs known as the Mokele Mbembe. And I have another colleague that's gone 5 times to Papua New Guinea, into some of the islands there, searching for something that was said to resemble a pterodactyl, called the ropin. So, but those I haven't had an opportunity to go to either of those locations, but I've heard some pretty gripping stories about my colleagues that have gone on some of those expeditions that have gotten pretty sick with malaria, staph infections. I mean, it's there's a lots of little things there that'll kill you and eat you. So, so it's pretty dangerous, and also the human element. I mean, if you get into some of these really remote areas in the jungle, it's kind of no man's land, and there's no 9/11, and then oftentimes investigators will run across kind of bandits and guerrillas, not
Right.
the ape gorilla, but gorilla, guys with machine guns and stuff. So some of those can be pretty dangerous.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine being out there. It's kind of rough when you're out in the middle of nowhere and there's no one coming to save
Yeah.
you. It's just you and
Nope.
whatever's out there.
You're on your own at
Yeah,
some of those situations for sure.
yeah, it's definitely interesting though. It's definitely once in a lifetime. If anybody ever has a chance to, it's definitely one of those things you should do. But so like I wanted to get to. I mean, obviously, you looked into werewolves. Now, would that be kind of along the same lines as like the dog man here? Would that kind of be the same thing? Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, I've investigated some dogman accounts here in North America, primarily the Beast of Bray Road, which is a famous one up in Wisconsin. There's also
Right.
been accounts of something called the Defiance Werewolf in Ohio. And then here in Texas, there have been a couple of cases that I investigated that were potentially related to quote unquote werewolves. And I have a lot of friends and colleagues that are into the dog man. I'm not real heavy into the dog man stuff. I find it fascinating, um, but the most famous one I investigated was actually in France. And what most people don't realize is that if you go to southern France, it's pretty remote. It's kind of like small mountains and very rural areas. And there's a famous legend there of a creature known as the Beast of Gévaudan. And this was way back in the 1760s. For 3 years, there was supposedly this giant wolf-like creature that went on a murderous rampage and attacked and killed anywhere from 60 to 100 people, often in very heinous and grotesque ways, decapitating people and disemboweling them. Most of its victims were children and women. And so I actually did a special for the History Channel in 2009 called "The Real Wolfman," and I went over there and investigated with another researcher. And obviously it's a very old case, so we weren't expecting to find the beast, but we did investigate a lot of the archival materials, which included the death certificates of its victims. We got to go to the areas where the victims were killed. I actually stood in the cemetery of victims, about a dozen victims. So whatever this thing was, it was definitely the closest thing to a werewolf that I guess anyone could imagine. Now, supposedly it was shot finally by the guy named Jean Chastel in 1767, but nobody knows what happened to the body. So there's kind of a mystery there in terms of where are the remains and so forth. But it's a pretty fascinating story, and in France, it's kind of like their version of Bigfoot or Chupacabra, or they have museums and statues, and it's a pretty famous legend, particularly in southern France.
Right. Yeah, I believe I've heard something of it in the past. Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I mean, the whole dogman thing here. I recently spoke with Jody Cook, which is from North American Dog Project as well.
Hmm.
He had a lot of great stories about that as well. It's just interesting to
Yeah,
to hear about. Like here we have the dog man, and obviously it has a bunch of different names, but to actually hear different stories about it all over the world is definitely interesting as well. It just kind of confirms a little bit more that it's not just something local and made up. There's actually other creatures around the world of the same kind. If a lot more people have seen it, then like that lends more credibility to it as well,
yeah,
which is
for
great.
sure.
Yeah, it's so. I mean, we can kind of here in Texas. I mean, one of the things I didn't really know too much was that there was a whole lot of Bigfoot sightings here in Texas until I spoke with Dark Waters a long like a while back. He was letting me know about stories that they had here about Bigfoots and things like that. But just something that I had never heard. Obviously, coming from West Texas,
Hmm.
there's not a whole lot of stories about that out there. But apparently, out here, up like in North Texas, where I'm at now, and in all these areas, there's apparently a whole bunch of stories about them that I never even knew about. So that's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, you're right. You're right. And where I live in San Antonio, we don't have a lot of Bigfoot sightings around here either, for obvious reasons. The habitat's not very wooded, or I should say, the woods are kind of small, scrubby mesquite trees and things.
Right.
But actually, out near San Antonio, there's a semi-famous Bigfoot creature known as the Horizon City Monster. If you know where Horizon City is,
Right.
and in about 2001, there was a woman in Horizon City named Cecilia Montañez who claims that she en- encountered this creature that was like a Bigfoot with pointy ears, and it was feasting on roadkill on the side of the road. And then she had a second sighting a year later, allegedly. But sightings of the Horizon City Monster actually go back to 1975, when some teenagers claimed they saw this Bigfoot running around on a golf course there. So, but those are rare. North Texas has a lot of sightings. Texas actually ranks pretty high in terms of the number of Bigfoot sightings around the US, probably about seventh on the list. But most of those sightings are in the far eastern part of the state, like east of I 45.
Okay.
So if you get into like in Northeast Texas, you have Jefferson, which is the
Mhm.
Bigfoot capital of Texas by Caddo Lake. And then you can travel down from there and you have like the Davy Crockett National Forest, and the Big Thicket, the Trinity River corridor, the Sabine River corridor. I mean, there's a lot of Bigfoot sightings in those areas, and if you've been in those areas, you realize it's not your typical Texas. It's really thick, you know, brush, swampy, dense, and very hard to get into. So that's where most of the Texas sightings of Bigfoot come from. But there are a lot of them.
Yeah, and it was kind of shocking to hear that. I mean, so I live kind of north of Dallas, about 20 minutes north, in Rockwall. So we're not like in the city, but we're up here, not too far. But you'd hear stories of like So, I mean, obviously, if you've been to Dallas, if anybody knows, there's kind of like that giant gap between downtown going into South Dallas, where it's like trees and it's just like those bridges that go back and forth and stuff. So apparently, in that area down there where there's nothing but grass and stuff, they were supposed to build a park. I don't know when that's supposed to be done. They were going to build like a whole lake thing with trees and all kinds of stuff. Who knows when that's going to happen? But I mean, apparently out through those areas, there's been like sightings of creatures in there,
Mhm.
Bigfoots and such. Like, because I mean, if you're driving over it, over the bridge, and you look down, it's just nothing but grass. But there's areas where it's just like trees and giant bushes, and there's water and stuff. You can see how things could live in there. But like, how do they get into that? Because it's right in the middle, like of downtown. So like, do they come from? Do those waters lead out somewhere? It's just kind of, unless you follow it. I've never actually been out to the end of it, so I don't know where it goes. But it's just kind of odd to know that in the middle of downtown, literally, there's like actual Bigfoot sightings like in the city, which is crazy, which is weird. But apparently, they're out there. So that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, those are rare, and you're right. Most sightings of Bigfoot occur typically in the deep wilderness areas, but even here around San Antonio, there were some sightings back in the 1970s near the old Kelly Air Force Base, which
Mm.
is pretty close to the center of the city with some wooded areas. But you're right, that is an enigma. Um, there are a number of theories about Bigfoot, and obviously it's all speculation. Paul, none of us know for sure, but I've been investigating it, for decades. But one of the theories is that they're very nomadic and they move around a lot. But with any animal species, you have something called a transient individual, which means that it's an individual that roams out of its expected range for whatever reason in search of food or just moving from spot A to spot B. And um, my own hypothesis about Bigfoot, if they exist, is that they have to be very intelligent. Not as intelligent as humans. I'm not saying that, but at least intelligent enough to recognize that they don't want to be discovered by humans, that we are their greatest threat or their direct competition. And so, if you consider that as an adaptation, then they're very, very good at staying hidden from us. And actually, I heard a great metaphor this past weekend. A colleague of mine called them the ninjas of the forest. So, in terms of looking at it like an army or, sniper or something like, those guys, they can just completely disappear and vanish and camouflage. And that's, I think, what kind of Bigfoot does. I think they're mostly out at night. They're nomadic, nocturnal, and they're good at supposedly good at like hiding behind trees and peeking out or just blending in.
Right.
So, I mean, it's this is all speculation, but if they're really, really good at that, then maybe they can find ways to somehow slip into those more populated areas on rare occasions. I'm not saying it happens a lot, but maybe
Sure.
once in a while.
Right.
Who knows?
Yeah. No, it's all definitely possible. I mean, it's kind of a weird area because I mean, for anybody that actually lives here, that's actually been to Dallas, knows what I'm talking about. But it's kind of like you're kind of getting into downtown, but you're not quite there. So it's like on the other side of there, it's South Dallas. But in between that area, it's so kind of wide and it's a lot of area. I mean, anything could be in there, and you never see anybody down there walking or anything like that. It's just kind of one of those areas that's left on, you know,
Right.
alone. So I mean, I have no doubt that maybe something could slip in the middle of the night or something, but there's just not enough people down there to really deter anything away. I mean, you even see deer and stuff in the cities. And so, I mean, it's possible. I mean, it's just weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is weird. You're right. It's like probably uncommon if it happens, but that is unusual if it does happen.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard, I just want to, I guess, maybe get your opinion on this so I've spoken to a number of people in the past about Bigfoot and, kind of what they are, where they come from or where they came from. Have they been here long before we were? I've even heard stories of like people spotting UFOs and Bigfoot coming out of UFOs. And that's probably one of the reasons why like nobody ever finds them, stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's
People. People
Yeah,
mention that. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, do you lend any? I mean, I guess, do you kind of keep your options open, or are you kind of, from what you've seen, do you kind of lean more towards one way or the other?
Well, I'm pretty open-minded, Paul. I pride myself on trying to stay as objective and open-minded as possible. But here's the thing, and this is an important distinction that we have to make with regard to what I do, cryptozoology. So the most important word in cryptozoology is zoology, which means the study of animals, which is a scientific study of all the species, known species on the planet, their behavior, their biology, adaptations, ecology, and evolution. So anything that is technically within the field of cryptozoology or a cryptid has to fit within that paradigm. Bigfoot actually does, because Bigfoot seems to resemble a hominid or a pre-human form or a great ape of some kind. It's kind of halfway between a man and a great ape. Um, and things that look like Bigfoot can be found in our fossil record. Things that look like Bigfoot did exist millions of years ago in Africa. So that's the first thing. There are some other cryptids too, like lake monsters, like the Loch Ness Monster, could very well be animals that haven't been discovered as well, because the descriptions match prehistoric animals.
Right.
Same with the giant birds that we have here in Texas, the thunderbirds. There were giant birds in North America 10,000 years ago called teratorns that had these 12 to 18-foot wingspans. Black panthers, and a lot of people don't realize that these are cryptids, but if you see a quote unquote giant black panther running around Texas or anywhere else, those are not supposed to exist, but a lot of people report seeing those. So
Hmm.
all of those are bona fide cryptids. Things that aren't technically in the field of cryptozoology include the dog man. There's nothing in the natural world that looks like dog man or even close. The mothman, and even things like the chupacabra. But I'm not saying those things don't exist. I'm just saying they're not, I don't see those as flesh and blood animals, or undiscovered animals like I view the others. I think they're something that's more, and I'm just purely speculating here, but if people want to call it supernatural or extraterrestrial or demonic or whatever, it's not of this, it's not flesh and blood, whatever they
Right.
are. So I've interviewed many people that have seen Dogman, Mothman, other weird creatures that should not exist, and they're very sincere and that they've seen something. So but I can't, I don't, my own opinion is that whatever those things are, that they're pretty much beyond our current level of understanding, that we don't know what they are, where they come from. And maybe they're not here all the time. Maybe they just manifest or come through different
Right.
windows or, whatever. There's a lot of theories about that. So again, I'm giving it credibility because I think, those are a valid phenomenon, but they're not necessarily, Dogman's not like Bigfoot. It's not, I don't think it's an animal running around in the woods out there. I think it's something that's, you know, metaphysical.
Right.
So
No, it definitely seem to be, especially like the Mothman, things like that, where, a lot of people report that they only see it when, something bad's about to happen, or like
right. Yeah.
directly afterwards. So it could maybe lend itself that people are manifesting itself, or manifesting it through like emotion, or, something like that. I mean,
Exactly. Great
anything's,
theory.
yeah. So like
I mean,
anything's
who
possible.
knows? Yeah, that's one of the theories. I wrote a book about Mothman, Encounters with Flying Humanoids, and even though it's not typical cryptozoology, I was speaking to so many eyewitnesses, and that was kind of one of my speculations. Paul, you nailed it. Is that maybe somehow we manifest these creatures into our reality, either through our emotions or our the power of our subconscious minds, or just something we don't understand. Because you
Right.
think about Dogman. I mean, did anyone ever really hear about Dogman until about like 30 years ago, 20 years ago?
Right.
It's not like Bigfoot where you can trace back a long history and you can find in Native American traditions.
Right.
Think about that. You have Native American traditions all over the continent about Bigfoot, things like lake monsters and thunderbirds. But there's no Native American traditions really that talk about Dogman, unless you consider the Skinwalker stories from the Navajo. But, so, anyways, it seems like in recent years, the dog man is now everywhere. I mean, there are
Right.
sightings all over the world and they're becoming more and more frequent. And to me, that infers kind of what you suggest. suggested that maybe this is something that we created with our minds or our collective conscious. And I don't know, it's a pretty far out theory, but that's really the only way I can, kind of wrap my head around it. So,
Yeah, yeah, it's true. I mean, up until I don't want to say maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, me personally, I had never heard any kind of actual stories about dogmen here in the States. And apparently they've been around for a while, but I mean, you look kind of back, the only other place you really find anything related to dogmen of any kind is like in the Bible, stuff like that. They have stories. But I mean, besides that, throughout the years, like thousands of years up until now, besides that, like, just like you said, there was no real like stories from Native Americans or anything like that. So
we have
yeah,
werewolf, but that's
yeah,
supposedly that's a little different. And so, like, this is a great debate that goes on with my friends in the dogman field because some people, well, it's just a werewolf. No, it's not. What's the difference? Well, the traditional werewolf from the 16th century in France and Germany and Europe was supposedly a shapeshifter. It was a person that could transform into a wolf-like creature either through witchcraft or some magic or pact with the devil.
right,
And so, and the traditional werewolf from France and Germany of the Middle Ages was like it was a four-legged animal. It looked like a wolf, but it had human-like eyes, and sometimes it didn't have a tail, but it was very much like a wolf on four legs. Whereas with the dog man, as you know, most people describe something that has like halfway between a wolf and or a dog and a human. It walks
right.
upright. It's got a dog-like head, but it's got like some human-like torso and shoulders, and so seems so. I don't know. That's kind of an interesting debate that I hear the dog man researchers like Jody Cook and others talk about and argue about is, well, what is it actually related to werewolf legends or
Mm.
is it something completely different?
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, there's different kind. It's all. I mean, it's all interesting. It's all, I guess, part of the same group. It just kind of depends who's telling the stories and what's been passed down over the years, and that definitely plays a big part in it. But
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, here, kind of in the states. I mean, the only other place that I've heard, which I thought was kind of a odd place for dogmen or like werewolves and such. I used to live in the Middle East for a while, and I heard a story of one out there. Um, Now, like in Afghanistan, things like that, you hear stories of stuff living like in the caves out there and living like in the mountains and such, especially when it comes to like giants and other stuff. But um,
Hmm.
who knows? I mean, I've only ever heard a story about a dogman, or I don't remember what they called it locally, but something that's related to it out there one time. They have all kinds of crazy creatures out there and a lot of like spiritual things, and the jinn is a
Hmm.
big one, and they have all kinds of
Yeah.
like crazy stories and such. But it's definitely everywhere. Like I mentioned, it gives it credibility when there's people all over the world seeing the same thing. Slight variations, maybe they call it something different or it had different colors or things like that. But just to
No, you're
know,
right.
yeah, just to know that other people around the world have seen similar things is great. So
Yeah, that,
that's
that is always the fascinating part is when you have corroboration from lots of different cultures or peoples. That is fascinating.
yeah, it's pretty crazy stuff. Yeah, so I wanted to kind of switch gears here. So you mentioned Loch Ness Monster. So you guys spent some time out there vacationing when you were younger. Um, Now a lot of people think maybe it's like a leftover dinosaur from way back. No one, just never seen it or they've never discovered it. Now uh, it's Lake Ness is obviously a lake, but it looks like a giant, giant lake, right? So who knows where underground tunnels could lead to? Maybe they lead to the ocean, things like that. So who knows what comes back and forth underneath? But I mean, from everything you've seen, do you think that there's maybe something under there that no one's ever seen before, no one's discovered? I mean, obviously, a lot of people have seen something, so there's always that. But I mean, what do you kind of think about that?
Yeah, it's been a lifelong fascination of mine along with Bigfoot. My newest book just came out this year is called The Essential Guide to the Loch Ness Monster and Other Aquatic Cryptids. It's available on Amazon if people are interested. But basically, I'm fairly convinced by the evidence, and again, I'm going to try to present this as scientifically as possible because I come from
Okay,
a zoological background.
sure.
You're right about Loch Ness. Okay, Loch Ness is the surface is very small in terms of it's narrow, 22 and a half miles long by about a mile to 1.7 miles wide, but it's incredibly deep. It's like a big Loch Ness is like a big rift, geological rift that was, when tectonic plates shifted. So it's
Right,
very steep cliffs, and it just goes down and down and down. And it's at least 754 feet deep, but there are potentially spots that are over 800 feet deep,
mm,
and the water is very dark because there's a lot of sediment and peat that runs into the water, so visibility is poor. So that's one of the reasons that the mystery has been so maintained. But anyways, there's like 263 billion cubic feet of water in Loch Ness, so it's tons of water. Um, it is an oligotrophic lake, meaning that it's nutrient poor, so there's not a lot of algae or plankton, so that's a problem for larger animals because there's
right,
not a really good food chain there. But there have been at least 3,000 documented sightings of Nessie or the Loch Ness Monster. They're ongoing. A lot of people think they all happened a long time ago, but I have contacts around Loch Ness that tell me that every year there are still at least 10 good sightings. There have been a lot of sonar contacts through the years, dating back to 1954, of giant 20 to 30-foot animate objects swimming around, hundreds of feet deep that no one's been able to identify. And some of the photographs have been hoaxed. So there are some hoaxed photographs, but there are some that are kind of compelling. So there is a substantial amount of evidence for the Loch Ness Monster. But if you take the wide view of that phenomenon, which I do in my book, things similar to the Loch Ness Monster have also been reported in the ocean, dating back centuries, where they were called sea serpents or sea monsters. And then even here in the US and North America, we have like the Lake Champlain monster up in New York and Vermont. We have one in Canada called the Ogopogo. Lake monsters have been reported from lakes in Russia, Scandinavia, Ireland, Japan. They're always the same types of lakes, Paul, just like Loch Ness. They're very cold, very deep lakes along the same lines of latitude in the northern hemisphere. So what I'm getting at is I think that if the Loch Ness monster exists, it's just one example of a bunch of these types of animals that are all over the world. And I personally think that they do travel into the lakes from the ocean. So
right,
like you said, they're not in the lakes all the time, like other uh, fish or species that are known as anadromous, like salmon and eels and sturgeon that travel in and out for whatever to breed or
right.
food or whatever. But I don't think it's a reptile. I don't think these are reptiles. I think that's one of the things I address in the book because the water is so cold in these lakes. Reptiles don't adapt well to really cold water. They're cold blooded. They're ectothermic. And also, virtually all the eyewitnesses of the Loch Ness monster and other lake monsters describe humped animals that move up and down like this when they
Right.
swim on the surface. So those are vertical undulations, right?
Mm,
Well, check this out. That is specifically a mammalian characteristic. That is aquatic mammals flex or swim up and down. Fish and reptiles swim side to side when they.
okay.
So my own theory is that whatever these animals are, that they are mammals. And I know that people say, well, what kind of mammals? Well, possibly a type of primitive whale. If you go back in the fossil record about 30 to 40 million years ago, there were these ancient snake like whales called archaeocetes or basilosaurs. A lot of people don't know these things existed, but they were whales, but they had a long snake like body. And they were like 60 feet long. So maybe something like that. Who knows? But I don't know if I advocate or endorse the theory about like a plesiosaur, which is like an ancient marine reptile. Um, but who knows? It's a mystery because people typically only see part of them, so
Right. Yeah.
you don't get the whole picture. You see like the hump or the back or maybe the head, but I think they could exist. I mean, the oceans are so explored. Who knows?
Yeah. It's always a shame when I hear, I mean, obviously it's not, okay. So I wouldn't say a shame, but when you hear like NASA and like SpaceX and all these things saying that they're going to space and they want to go to these planets and such, but like so much of the ocean here on Earth has not been explored. Like we know more about space than we do about like underwater here. And so it's like we should be looking inward instead of outward. I mean,
Yeah,
like
I'm with you.
so like I spent some time in the Navy, and I heard a lot of stories about people being out at sea, and I guess I had a lot of friends that like used to be like on nuclear submarines and such, and like the things that they would see not only underwater but like out at sea, like in the middle of the night. Oh, I saw like this thing poking its head out the water, and like we're underneath the water, and you would hear noises and just all kinds of crazy stuff. So it's like, is there maybe like another, let me say, world underneath the ocean that we're not aware of, like animals that have adapted so well that they can live at the bottom of the ocean, just kind of going in and out? And is there tunnels that interconnect around the world? I'm sure, but um, yeah, I mean, is there any other kind of like crazy sea creatures that, besides the ones that everybody knows, obviously Loch Ness Monster, but is there like anything else?
Well, you kind of hit the nail on the head there, and you obviously have the experience. But like I always like to point out to people, I mean, there are new things being discovered in the ocean all the time. The average depth of the ocean, Paul, is 12,000 feet. I don't know if you know that. That's the average depth.
Right.
So I mean, it goes. Some of those trenches go down like 27,000, 30,000 feet. But these sea serpents or Nessies are the most famous or widely known, but there have been theories and speculation about giant sharks like Megalodon.
Right.
It was a giant ancient shark I don't personally advocate that. I don't think that necessarily one of the stronger candidates. People know about the giant squid,
Hmm.
which used to be a legendary creature in Norse mythology called the Kraken.
Right.
And then we discovered that they, at great depths, you have these monstrous squids that are like 50 feet long, giant eyes like that big. Um, Maybe there's something bigger than a giant squid. These are invertebrates or mollusks. So if they live deep in the ocean, I mean, there's nothing that would limit their growth potential. They don't have backbones, or they don't have spines and backbone bones like us,
Right. Right.
so they can just grow and grow and grow. There have been reports of giant sea turtles, like monstrous sea turtles, bigger than any of the known, like leatherback or loggerhead turtles.
Right.
Um, so those are kind of the main ones, but I just interviewed a guy for my Loch Ness book about a year ago who discovered a new species of whale back in 2017. And
Hmm.
people don't realize this. They're still finding new types of whales in the ocean.
Yeah.
Even in recent years. So that shows you right there that there's a good Navy related cryptid story if you're interested.
Yeah. Absolutely.
In 1976, there was a Navy research trawler off the coast of Hawaii, off the northern coast of Oahu, had lowered these giant anchors that were like umbrella shaped anchors very deep in the ocean. And when they pulled them up, there was a giant shark that was about 14 feet long that was tangled up. And it died pretty
Hmm.
quickly when they pulled it out. Well, they didn't know what it was, so they took it to a local research station there in Hawaii, naval research station. They called the local marine biologist in from the Waikiki Aquarium, and he looked at this shark, and he called his professor and his colleagues, and they were like, "This we don't know what this thing is." And it turned out to be a new species of shark called the megamouth shark.
Okay.
And they're some of the rarest sharks in the world. They've only been seen about 60 times since the 1970s. But these things are crazy. They have like bioluminescent lips that
Okay.
draw in like small animals and things. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so, I mean, there you go, right there. There's a perfect example of how the Navy played a role in discovering this giant species of shark that we'd never heard about before. So that's a kind of a cool story.
Yeah, it's kind of like those fish that have those like lights hanging off the front of their heads, like right
Yeah.
in front of them, and then yeah, and they catch them. It's so it's kind of a crazy thing, like when things like that happen, to think about maybe somebody's discovered something and they just didn't know what they were looking at, and they just kind of threw it back in the ocean or whatever. It's like, so my wife's from the Philippines, and they always have things wash up on the beach that they don't know what
Yeah.
it is. And like, I'm sure you've seen those videos, and
Hmm.
everybody's like around, and they're just like, ah, whatever, and they just throw it back, or so it might be something that no one's ever seen before, but they just either don't care or they just
Right.
don't know what it
Yeah.
is. They're just like, eh, we'll just throw it back in the ocean. Like, I wonder how many things, or how many last of its kind creatures or animals have been found that way, and like we'll just never see
Yeah.
them anymore because nobody knows what they are, and they're just like, ah, well, whatever. So that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I just wish we would kind of look inward more. Like I wish we would spend more money and time um, putting resources into kind of going like into the ocean deeper. Now, obviously, there's a lot of people that do a lot of great work on it. It's I want to overlook their what they do, but when it comes to like millions and millions of dollars of grants and like money from like private companies to go like under the ocean, you just don't see it, which is unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people think, well, I wouldn't say a lot of people, but a lot of people that I've spoken with say that squids and octopus aren't from this world just because of
Yeah.
like their makeup, which is definitely interesting if that's the case, and who knows. But just because of the fact of what they're made up like, and how they're able to squeeze through tiny holes, and they have no bones, and they're just able to do whatever. It's You could definitely see that they'd probably be like an alien from another world or something. It's definitely interesting to think about.
Pretty weird. And there are definitely a lot of things in the deep ocean that we haven't seen yet, just because it's so difficult to get down there. But going back to your point about the Philippines, and there's actually a chapter in my book on the Essential Guide to Loch Ness Monster where I talk about a lot of these carcasses around the world that have washed up on beaches. A lot of them have been identified over time. Most of them have, but like you said, they're very hard to identify. And there was actually a recent case in the Philippines. Um, so what happened, and I don't have the book in front of me, so I'm just kind of going to spitball this, but there was an underwater earthquake off the coast of New Zealand. And
Okay.
what that did was it caused a lot of sperm whales to freak out. And basically, they were real sensitive to the vibrations. So they kind of got off course
Mm.
and just kind of, they eventually died because they were so discombobulated by everything that happened. Well, these rotting sperm whale carcasses were out at sea for who knows months, and then they eventually washed up on Philippine beaches. And you can see these videos on YouTube. There are these giant white rotting masses, and
Yeah.
it doesn't look like a whale anymore. It's just a big white blubbery blob that,
Loaded
and they
mess.
look
Yeah.
and they look hairy too because the fibrous tissues of the muscles and the fatty tissues break up and it looks like fur or hair, but it's not. It's like
Right.
fatty tissue. But anyway, so that those come up all the time, and people when they see them, like you said, they're like, "What is that?" It's just a big white, 60-foot long mass. And then sometimes, but fortunately now we have DNA testing, so scientists can, if they get a sample, they can, okay, that was a sperm whale or whatever. But
Right.
who knows how many opportunities have been missed like that, Paul, where something washed up and people didn't report it or didn't, you know, didn't
Yeah.
didn't
It's
pay any attention
unfortunate.
to it. It might have been something completely unknown. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely sad to think about. It's especially out there, like in the Philippines. I mean, they get enough attention to where they put it like online, like, hey, what's this? Whatever. But besides that, I mean, if nobody else sees it from around the world, like from here in the States, like guys like yourself or like other people that actually study it, if nobody sees it, then it's just another like animal that washed up or another whale,
Mhm.
and then they just leave it to rot or they throw it back in the ocean and then it's just gone forever. So it's quite unfortunate, but it happens, and hopefully we get to discover a whole lot more stuff. Like you said, there's a lot of stuff that we still don't know about the ocean, and they're discovering things all the time, even like in the jungles and such. So
Yeah,
that's
for
some great
sure.
stuff. But so as we wind down our time here together, I just really want to appreciate, thank you for spending some time with me today. But like you mentioned before, um, anybody that wants to pick up your books, where can they get your latest books? And I really appreciate you sending over the book as well. I have a Menagerie of Mysterious Beasts right here for anybody that wants to pick it up as well. Go ahead and do that. Can they find these on Amazon only, or can they go to your website, or how would they do that?
Yeah. Well, thanks again for having me on, man. Some great questions and discussion. Yeah, all my books are available on Amazon. If people just type in Ken Gerhard, they can go to my author page and find them and purchase them there directly. I do sell autographed books, signed books, or personalized books directly. And people, usually the best way to contact me is either through my website, kengerhard.com, or I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. So I'm pretty easy to find on social media, and I'm happy to, some people want signed books or personalized books, and I'm happy to do that directly. So yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah.
and I am on I'm currently on a TV series on the History Channel called The Proof Is Out There,
Okay.
and season 2 will be debuting at the end of this month, August. You'll have to check your local listings. It usually comes on before Ancient Aliens,
Okay.
but yeah, if people are interested in checking that show out, The Proof Is Out There on the History Channel.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we'll have all the links down below for everybody. We'll have the website, kengerhard.com, Facebook, Ken Gerhard, Cryptozoologist. We'll have the books down below as well, as the show as well. So everybody wants to check that out, they can find that. Sir, I appreciate the time. I really enjoy your work. Reading to the book as well, so I'm a little more than halfway done with it. So that'll be done
Oh,
hopefully by
cool.
the end of the week.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, I try to get through everybody's books, before I have them on. For this one, I was kind of taking my time because I was reading it to my son as well. He enjoys it, so that's good.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we'll be
It's
getting
good
through
to hear.
that as
How
well.
old is your son?
He's 7 right now.
Okay, perfect, man. That's
Yeah,
right around the age when I got interested in all this stuff. So that makes me feel good. That makes my heart happy that he's interested. That's very
yeah,
cool.
yeah. He's all about anything creepy and like any kind of weird beasts and stuff. So he really enjoys it. So yeah, it's a great book. He really enjoys it. So we're almost done with that. We'll get through those as well. So I really appreciate the time. And like I said, I'll have all the links down below for everybody that wants to check out all the books. You guys can head over to kengerhard.com as well on Facebook. We'll have all the links to all the social media as well. Sir, appreciate it. Stay safe out there.
Thanks, Paul, and thank you to everyone who listened in today.
Absolutely, guys. I really
Be safe
appreciate.
out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody stay safe. I really appreciate you guys stopping in once again. Like I mentioned before, if you guys aren't already a subscriber on YouTube, please consider hitting that subscribe button right now, that like button as well, and the bell icon so you don't miss an episode in the future. You guys can catch us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, as well as iHeartRadio if you guys are on the go. I'll have all the links for social media down below. You can shoot us an email, like I said before. Questions or comments for myself or our guests. Any guest or topic recommendations can be sent over to thetruthfender1776@gmail.com. Everybody stay safe out there, stay blessed, and most of all, stay frosty.
Perfect.